Millionaire paid a poor candy seller to have his child, but the baby's birth left him stunned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Adrian Blackwell was a man people only ever saw from a distance. At just 32, he had built an empire that stretched across finance, tech, and real estate. To the public, he was the definition of ruthless success. To those closest, he was cold, efficient, and merciless in both boardrooms and personal life. But what most didn't know was that behind the glass walls of his high-rise office, Adrian carried a private war with his family. His mother had insisted on an arranged marriage with Meredith Kensington, a woman from another powerful family. It would merge fortunes, lock down control, and extend the Blackwell dynasty. But Adrian despised the thought of being chained by expectation. He wanted control over his own life. Even if that control meant something drastic, that was when he began considering an outrageous idea, one that would free him from his family's grip and satisfy his own obsession with legacy. He didn't need a wife chosen by his mother. What he needed was an heir. And if money could buy everything else in his world, then it could certainly buy him that. Miles away, Evelyn Carter stood on a street corner with a wicker basket slung over her arm. She was 23, her long, wavy, dark brown hair pulled back loosely, her eyes tired but soft. The smell of caramel and chocolate followed her wherever she went. Selling homemade candy was the only way she kept herself and her mother alive after her father's sudden death left them in crushing debt. She wore a faded cardigan and a worn-out skirt, clothes that still carried dignity despite years of hardship. Every morning, Evelyn placed her small wooden stall near the subway entrance. She smiled politely, called out softly to strangers, and hoped they would buy at least a piece. Some ignored her, some sneered, others pitied her enough to hand her $1. But day after day, she stood there, refusing to collapse under the weight of poverty. Adrian first noticed her by accident. One cold afternoon, his sleek black car idled at a red light. His gaze shifted to the sidewalk, and there she was, clutching her basket against the wind, her lips trembling but her chin held high. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't look away. There was something in her defiance, something raw and unpolished, that stirred him. A week later, he returned. This time, he ordered his driver to stop. He stepped out, the crowd parting as though the air itself shifted around him. Evelyn looked up, startled, clutching her basket tighter. She had seen men like him before in magazines and on television. Tailored suit, expensive watch, the kind of presence that made ordinary people shrink. "You sell candy?" His voice was calm, smooth, but carried an edge that unsettled her. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. "Would you like to try some?" He didn't take the basket. Instead, his piercing blue eyes studied her. After a long silence, he said, "I have a proposal. Not for candy, for something far more valuable." Her brows furrowed. "Excuse me? I don't want a wife chosen for me. I want a child, an heir. And I'm willing to pay you to give me one." "Oh." The words hung in the air, heavier than the winter wind. Evelyn almost laughed, thinking it must be some cruel joke, but Adrian's expression was dead serious. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You don't need to," he replied. "All you need to know is that I'll cover every expense. Medical care, housing, security. You'll never worry about money again. In return, you'll give me what I want, a child." Her breath caught. The basket trembled in her hands. Evelyn had lived through humiliation, hunger, and endless rejection. But nothing had prepared her for this. A stranger, a millionaire, was asking her to bear his child like it was a business deal. I'm not that kind of woman," she stammered, her voice breaking. Adrian's gaze hardened. "I didn't say you were. But you need money, don't you? Everyone has a price. I'm offering you a way out of the life you're stuck in." She turned her head, blinking back the sting of tears. Yes, she needed money. Her mother's medical bills were piling up. The rent was overdue, and her little brother had dropped out of school to work odd jobs, all because she couldn't carry the weight alone. Every day was survival, nothing more. But was this survival worth the cost? Evelyn gripped her basket tighter, her knuckles white. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice low. Adrian's reply was as cold as it was final. "Because you don't belong in my world, and that makes you the perfect choice." And in that single moment, the path of both their lives twisted into something neither could ever predict. Evelyn stood frozen on that street corner, long after Adrian's car had pulled away. The city noise swirled around her, horns blaring. Strangers rushing past, but she couldn't hear anything over the echo of his words. "I'm offering you a way out." For the next few nights, she couldn't sleep. She replayed the conversation, again and again. It sounded insane, unthinkable. What kind of man treated life like a transaction? What kind of woman would agree to such a thing? Yet, every time she looked at the unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen table, or listened to her mother's cough echoing through their tiny apartment, the question clawed at her. Did she even have the right to refuse? When Adrian returned, she knew she had been waiting for him. His car stopped by the curb as if it belonged there, sleek and black against the gray concrete. This time he didn't waste time with introductions. He simply stepped out, coat crisp against the wind, and looked at her with the same sharp eyes. "Have you thought about my offer?" he asked. Her grip on the basket tightened. "That wasn't an offer. That was indecent." "It's survival," Adrian replied calmly. "You need money. I need an heir. We can help each other." "I'm not an object to be rented," she snapped. His jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. "You're not. But this is reality, Evelyn. The world doesn't care about intentions, only results. You sell candy for pennies. I'm offering you millions. With one decision, you can secure your family's future forever." The way he said it flat, certain, made her chest tighten. He spoke like a man who always got what he wanted. Like there was no such thing as no. That night, Evelyn returned to her small apartment, the ceiling cracked, the radiator wheezing weakly. Her mother sat at the table, pale, trying to hide the pain in her chest. Her younger brother came in, his hands calloused from washing dishes after school. Evelyn looked at them and felt the crushing weight of choice press down harder than ever. By the end of the week, she called the number Adrian had slipped into her basket. The next morning, a black car picked her up. It drove her past neighborhoods she had never stepped foot in, past glittering towers and doormen in uniforms, until it stopped in front of the Blackwell mansion. Marble pillars rose like a fortress, the gates taller than any she'd ever seen. Inside, everything gleamed: polished floors, chandeliers dripping crystal, staff lined up neatly in silence. Evelyn felt her breath hitch. She didn't belong here. Every glance from the maids and butlers reminded her of it. Their eyes scanned her faded cardigan, her worn shoes, her basket still clutched in one hand, and dismissed her instantly. Adrian appeared at the top of the staircase, every inch the billionaire prince. He didn't smile, he didn't welcome her. He simply gestured for her to follow him into his study. On the desk lay a thick stack of papers. A contract. Evelyn stared at it, heart pounding. "So, this is really happening?" Adrian's voice was cool. "Read it. It outlines everything. You'll receive medical care, private security, housing. Upon the child's birth, a trust fund will be established for your family. In return, you agree to carry my child and relinquish any legal claim." The words blurred on the page. She thought of her mother, coughing at night, her brother, worn out before his life had even begun, and she thought of herself, a candy seller who had never once been allowed to dream. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. Adrian's gaze stayed fixed on her. For a brief moment, she wondered if there was any humanity in those ice-blue eyes. Did he feel even a shred of guilt? Or was she just another signature in his ledger? She hesitated, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this with me? You could have any woman in the world. Why me?" He leaned forward, his tone clipped. "Because you're not part of my world. You won't ask for love. You won't complicate things with ambition. You'll do what needs to be done. That makes you perfect." Oh. The finality of his words cut deep. She realized then that he hadn't chosen her in spite of her poverty, he had chosen her because of it. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. With one shaky breath, she lowered the pen and signed her name. The room was silent, save for the scratch of ink on paper. When it was done, Adrian took the contract, glanced at it once, then slid it into a folder as though it were just another deal. "From this moment," he said, standing tall, "you live here. Everything you need will be provided. But remember, this is a contract, not a marriage. Don't expect anything else." Evelyn nodded stiffly, her throat too tight to speak. As Adrian left the study, she stood alone, staring at the massive windows overlooking the city skyline. The world outside glittered with wealth and power, but she had never felt smaller. She had sold her future for survival, and yet, as her hand brushed against her stomach, a silent thought rose in her chest. Whatever happened next, she would fight for this child with everything she had. She just didn't know yet how much that fight would change both of their lives forever. The first week inside the Blackwell mansion felt like a sentence more than a gift. Evelyn walked through endless marble corridors where her footsteps echoed too loudly. Every servant's glance carried quiet judgment. She could almost hear their thoughts. The candy seller, the girl who doesn't belong here. Her room was larger than her entire apartment, with silk sheets and windows overlooking the city skyline. But at night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, clutching her pillow against the silence. The luxury around her didn't warm her, it made her feel caged. Adrian kept his distance. He was always in motion, moving between boardrooms, dinners, and private calls. When they crossed paths, he was polite but cold, his words clipped like business notes. To him, she wasn't a wife. She wasn't even a woman. She was the vessel of a contract. The first doctor's appointment came quickly. Adrian's driver escorted her to a private clinic, walls pristine and white. Cameras clicked outside, flashes exploding as reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Blackwell, who is she? Is this your mistress? Are you expecting a child?" Evelyn froze, shrinking against the attention. She had never seen so many microphones pushed into her face. Adrian, walking beside her in his tailored suit, didn't flinch. His hand pressed lightly against her back, guiding her forward with an authority that silenced the chaos. Inside the clinic, he released her as if nothing had happened. Evelyn sat nervously while the doctor confirmed her pregnancy. Adrian stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. When the doctor congratulated them, Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Congratulated. As if this was love. As if this was real. But all she could think of was the contract signed with her shaking hand. On the ride back, silence filled the car. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "Why did you let them photograph us?" Adrian's gaze stayed on the city streets rushing past. They were always going to find out. Better to control the story than to hide it. So now the whole world thinks I'm... She stopped herself, voice cracking. He turned to her, expression flat. "They can think what they want. It changes nothing. You'll have everything you need." Evelyn bit her lip to keep from crying. To him, it was that simple. To her, it was humiliation that would follow her forever. Days later, his family called for a dinner. Evelyn dreaded it from the moment the invitation came. The Blackwell dining hall was a cathedral of wealth crystal chandeliers, polished silver, portraits of ancestors lining the walls. Evelyn sat at one end of the long table, feeling like a stain on its perfection. Adrian's mother, Elizabeth, studied her with thinly veiled disdain. "So," she said, voice cool, "you're the girl, selling candy on street corners one day, carrying a Blackwell heir the next. I suppose miracles happen." Heat rushed to Evelyn's cheeks. She lowered her eyes, gripping the edge of her chair. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't defend her. He cut his steak with mechanical precision, as though her humiliation wasn't worth interrupting his meal. Elizabeth leaned closer. "Understand this, you may be here now, but you'll never be one of us. You're temporary, disposable. Once the child is born, you'll fade back to where you belong." Evelyn's hands trembled under the table. She wanted to scream, to throw her glass across the room. Instead, she sat tall, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I don't want your name, or your approval. I only want my child to live." The table fell silent. For a flicker of a moment, Adrian's eyes met hers. There was something there, something he didn't show often, but then it was gone, buried beneath his usual coldness. That night, back in her room, Evelyn cried silently into her pillow. The mansion was suffocating, the judgment unbearable, but she had made her choice. She would endure it all for the child. Meanwhile, Adrian stood alone in his study, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. Her words from dinner echoed in his mind. I only want my child to live. He told himself it didn't matter. This was business, a contract fulfilled. But for the first time, he wondered if he had underestimated the girl who sold candy on the street. And deep inside, though he wouldn't admit it, something began to shift. The days that followed the family dinner were heavy with silence. Evelyn rarely saw Adrian. And when she did, he carried himself with the same distant composure. Yet something about the way he occasionally looked at her felt different, like her words at the dining table had left a mark he couldn't erase. Still, in the mansion, she was treated as an intruder. Servants whispered when she passed, lowering their voices, but never enough. Some called her a gold digger, others pitied her. She learned to keep her head high, to walk as though she didn't hear a word. One evening, Adrian appeared at her door, his expression unreadable. "Tomorrow, you'll attend a boardroom meeting with me," he said. Evelyn blinked. "Why? That has nothing to do with me?" "Because," he replied calmly, "the world already knows who you are. If they're going to talk, let them see you." The next morning, she followed him into Blackwell Tower. The elevator carried them to the top floor, where glass walls revealed Manhattan's skyline in the golden light of morning. Inside the boardroom, men in dark suits glanced up as Adrian entered. Their eyes quickly shifted to Evelyn, and their smirks followed. She sat quietly at the side of the long, polished table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Adrian led the meeting, his voice sharp and commanding as he discussed numbers, mergers, and future investments. But she could feel the weight of those smirks pressing on her, like invisible daggers. At last, one of the older directors chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Forgive me, Adrian, but is this really necessary? Bringing your companion here?" His tone dripped with mockery. "This isn't the kind of place for candy sellers, is it?" The room erupted with soft laughter. Evelyn's face burned, but she kept her gaze steady. She had endured worse on the streets. But here, surrounded by polished glass and expensive suits, the insult cut deeper. Adrian's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn spoke first. Her voice was calm, steady, though her heart raced. "If candy sellers didn't exist, your children wouldn't have their favorite treats. And if men like you only measure worth in dollars, then you've already forgotten what hard work looks like." The laughter died instantly. The director's smirk faltered. Adrian turned to her, surprise flickering in his icy blue eyes. He had expected her to shrink, to stay silent. Instead, she stood taller in that moment than anyone else in the room. The rest of the meeting continued with unusual restraint. When it ended, the directors left quietly, no more laughter trailing behind them. Adrian remained by the head of the table, watching Evelyn as she gathered her things. "You didn't have to say that," he said finally. Evelyn met his gaze, her chin high. "And you didn't have to stay silent." For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was charged, heavy with something unspoken. Adrian had built his life on control, on never letting anyone disrupt his order. But this woman, this girl who once sold candy on the street, had shattered the silence in his world without hesitation. Back in the car, the ride was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. Adrian stared out the window, his reflection staring back at him. Evelyn looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly. She couldn't explain why she had spoken up. She only knew that if she hadn't, she would never forgive herself. That night, Adrian poured himself a glass of scotch in his study. He should have been angry. He should have felt humiliated that she had spoken out of turn in front of his board. Instead, he kept hearing her words. "You've already forgotten what hard work looks like." For the first time in years, he remembered his own childhood long before the billions, before the Blackwell name carried power. He remembered the sound of his father's voice telling him nothing came without sacrifice. Somewhere along the way, he had buried those lessons under steel and glass. Evelyn had dragged them back to the surface with one sentence. Across the mansion, Evelyn sat by her window, staring at the glittering city lights. She thought of the look in Adrian's eyes, the fleeting moment of surprise. She wondered if she had gone too far, if he would punish her for it. But deep down, she knew she couldn't live like a shadow. If she was going to carry this child, she had to keep her dignity intact. And in the silence of the night, both of them wrestled with thoughts they didn't dare voice. That this contract had already begun to change them, in ways neither could have predicted. The weeks after the boardroom incident moved slowly. Yet the tension between Evelyn and Adrian only grew sharper. The staff at the mansion still whispered, but now their eyes carried something new: curiosity. They had seen her walk beside Adrian into Blackwell Tower, had heard the rumors that she'd spoken back to powerful men without fear. Some looked at her with disdain, but others, quietly, with a trace of respect. But outside the mansion walls, Evelyn's presence became harder to ignore. The press caught her at doctor's appointments, at charity events, and in the back seat of Adrian's sleek black cars. Headlines ran wild. Blackwell heir with street candy seller. From pennies to palaces. Who is Evelyn Carter? The Blackwell family hated it. To them, she was a stain on their name, a spectacle for tabloids to exploit. That's why, when Elizabeth Blackwell invited Evelyn to a charity gala, it wasn't an act of kindness, it was a setup. Evelyn stood before the mirror in her room, adjusting the simple gown that had been chosen for her. It was elegant, but modest, far plainer than the shimmering dresses of the socialites she would face. She told herself she didn't care. She was here for the child, not approval. Still, her stomach tightened as she thought of walking into that glittering hall filled with eyes, waiting to judge her. Adrian entered without knocking. His gaze flicked over her once before landing on her reflection. "You'll be at my side tonight," he said flatly. Evelyn nodded. "And if they humiliate me?" His jaw flexed. "Then you'll endure it. This is the world you agreed to step into." Her throat tightened, but she didn't argue. She had learned by now that Adrian's words carried little comfort, even when his eyes sometimes betrayed a flicker of something more. The gala hall was everything. She feared golden chandeliers, champagne towers, and rows of glittering gowns that seemed designed to mock her simplicity. Cameras flashed the moment Adrian and Evelyn entered. He walked tall, his hand resting lightly on her arm, his expression composed as ever. But she felt the heat of stares prickling her skin, the whispered laughter that followed her every step. It didn't take long for the trap to spring. Meredith Kensington glided toward them, her gown a cascade of silver that shimmered under the lights. She leaned in, her smile sharp. "Adrian," she purred, ignoring Evelyn entirely. "I see you brought your charity project." Evelyn's stomach clenched, but she stood still. Adrian's expression remained carved in stone. Moments later, as waiters moved through the crowd, one stumbled near Evelyn. A glass of red wine toppled, splashing down the front of her pale dress. Gasps rippled across the room. The crimson stain spread across her gown like a wound. Meredith's laughter rang out, soft but unmistakable. "Oh dear," she said sweetly, her eyes glittering with malice. "Clumsy girls never belong in places like this." All around them, guests whispered, some covering their smiles behind champagne flutes. Evelyn's cheeks burned, but she refused to cry. She placed one hand lightly on the ruined fabric, straightened her back, and lifted her chin. Her voice carried clearly, though it trembled at the edges. "It's just a dress. Stains wash out. What about the stains money can't clean?" The room fell silent, eyes widened. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Meredith's smile faltered. Evelyn turned, ready to walk away, when she felt Adrian's hand close around hers. For the first time, he wasn't hiding her, wasn't treating her like a shadow. His jaw was set, his gaze hard, but his fingers tightened protectively around her own. He didn't say anything to the crowd, but the gesture was louder than words. Later, in the car ride home, Evelyn stared out the window, her chest still heaving with the memory of dozens of eyes burning into her. The ruined dress clung cold against her skin. Adrian sat beside her, silent as always, though his grip on the leather seat betrayed his tension. Finally, she whispered, "Do you enjoy watching me humiliated?" His head turned sharply, blue eyes piercing. "Number, but you endured it better than most people I know. You stood taller than they ever expected." She met his gaze, searching for mockery, but found none. Only something unspoken, something fragile, quickly hidden behind his usual mask. Back at the mansion, Evelyn hung the stained dress in the back of her wardrobe. She knew it would never be worn again. But instead of shame, she felt a strange flicker of pride. She had survived the fire and walked out standing. And though Adrian would never admit it, that night at the gala changed something in him too. The image of her chin lifted high, defying a room full of laughter, would not leave his mind. It haunted him long after the lights of the gala faded into darkness. The gala night left ripples that did not fade quickly. The tabloids feasted on the scene, the spilled wine, Evelyn's defiance, Adrian's silent but public gesture of holding her hand. Photographs splashed across covers with headlines that cut sharp. Candy Seller holds her head high. Blackwell's strange choice. A woman who won't bow. Evelyn tried to ignore it, but the whispers in the mansion only grew louder. Some of the staff looked at her differently now, less with contempt, more with wary respect. Others despised her even more, muttering that she was trouble, that she would ruin Adrian's reputation. Adrian himself remained a puzzle. For days after the gala, he barely spoke to her, as if holding her hand had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He was colder than usual, yet every so often Evelyn caught his eyes on her, as though he was trying to solve a riddle only he could see. The confrontation came one evening. Evelyn had just returned from a prenatal appointment, exhausted, when Adrian appeared at her door. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" His tone was sharp, his frame rigid in the doorway. She frowned. "Enjoyed what?" "The attention, the headlines. You wanted them to see you as more than you are. You thrived on it." Her chest tightened with anger. "I didn't ask for any of that. I didn't ask for spilled wine, or laughter, or your family's cruelty. I only stood my ground because no one else would." Adrian's jaw flexed, but he didn't look away. "You put yourself in danger. Do you know what that room could have done to you? They're sharks. They would have torn you apart." Oh, Evelyn's voice rose, trembling but steady. "And what were you going to do? Stand there and let them? You wanted me silent, invisible. Well, I'm not invisible, Adrian. You may have paid for my body, but you didn't buy my dignity." The words hit like a strike. He stepped back slightly, his mask of composure cracking. For a moment, Evelyn thought she saw pain in his eyes, real, human pain. But then, it vanished. "Careful," he warned quietly. "You're walking a dangerous line." She lifted her chin. "Maybe, but it's the only way I know how to survive." That night, Adrian poured himself a drink in his study, replaying her words. He had built a world where control was everything, where weakness had no place. And yet, this woman, this girl who sold candy to strangers, kept refusing to bend. It infuriated him. It fascinated him. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her stomach gently. The child inside her kicked softly, and for the first time, she smiled through her exhaustion. She whispered to the baby, promising she would protect it no matter what, even if it meant standing against Adrian himself. A week later, fate tested that promise. Adrian had arranged another public appearance, this time a charity fundraiser hosted at Blackwell Tower. Evelyn dreaded it, but she walked at his side, shoulders squared, determined not to show fear. The lobby was filled with marble, glass, and the glitter of the city's elite. Cameras clicked as they entered, reporters shouting questions, their words sharp as knives. Inside, Evelyn tried to blend into the background, but it was impossible. People watched her every move. When Adrian stepped away to speak with investors, she found herself alone near the refreshment table. A group of women in jeweled gowns circled like vultures. "So you're the famous candy seller," one sneered. "Tell us, how does it feel to trade lollipops for luxury?" Another mocked. "Do you even know which fork to use?" A third laughed, pointing to the table set with silver cutlery. Evelyn's chest burned, but she remembered the child inside her, remembered the promise she had made. She steadied her voice. "I may not know which fork to use, but I know what it means to work for every dollar. Can any of you say the same?" The laughter faltered. One woman's smile froze, but before Evelyn could retreat, Adrian appeared at her side. His hand rested firmly on her back, his expression glacial as he looked at the women. "Find someone else to gossip about," he said coldly. "She is with me." The women scattered, their jewels clinking as they turned away. Evelyn's heart pounded, not from their cruelty, but from Adrian's words. "She is with me." The ride home was silent, but it wasn't the silence of distance. Evelyn sat staring out the window, her reflection blurred against the city lights. Adrian sat beside her, his hand resting on his knee, clenched tightly as though holding back words he couldn't say. Something had shifted again, subtle but undeniable. They both felt it, though neither dared name it. And as the city lights flickered past, Evelyn realized her fight was no longer just for survival. It was for something deeper, something she didn't yet understand, but could feel growing stronger with every passing day. The charity fundraiser marked a turning point, though neither Adrian nor Evelyn admitted it out loud. In the days that followed, an uneasy calm settled over the mansion. Adrian's coldness softened in subtle ways. He no longer barked orders when speaking to her. And when she walked into a room, his eyes followed her longer than before. Evelyn noticed, though she pretended not to. Still, their conversations remained sharp. They clashed often, their words like flint against stone. But beneath every argument, there was an undercurrent, something unspoken that neither dared to acknowledge. One afternoon, Evelyn sat in the library, a room she had avoided until then. The shelves towered above her, filled with books whose spines gleamed with wealth. She pulled down a novel, running her fingers along its worn pages. For a moment, she lost herself, forgetting the contract, forgetting the whispers. Adrian found her there. He leaned against the doorway, watching quietly before speaking. "You read?" She glanced up, surprised. "Of course I read." His lips curved almost imperceptibly. "Most people I know don't have the patience for books anymore." "That's because most people you know never had to escape the world around them," she replied softly. The answer lingered in the air. Adrian said nothing more. But he stepped into the room, pulled a book from the shelf, and sat across from her. They read in silence, the distance between them filled not with hostility but with something gentler. Later that evening, Evelyn walked through the garden, the crisp autumn air brushing against her skin. She paused by the roses, their petals heavy with dew. Adrian appeared again, as if drawn to the same place. "Why do you always come out here?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Because flowers don't judge. They grow, no matter who tends them." For the first time, he laughed a low, brief sound that startled her. It wasn't mocking, but real. She stared at him, wide-eyed, realizing she had never heard him laugh before. And though it lasted only a moment, it left her chest strangely warm. But the fragile peace between them didn't last long. At a dinner the following week, Adrian's business associates gathered at the mansion. Evelyn sat at the long polished table, the only one without a glass of wine in hand. Conversation flowed around her like a current she couldn't enter. Until one man, Calloway, smirked and raised his glass in her direction. "To the future mother of the Blackwell heir," he drawled. "May the candy she once sold be sweeter than the child she now carries." Laughter erupted. Evelyn's heart pounded, her face flushing hot. She wanted to vanish, but instead she steadied herself and spoke. "Better to have sold candy with honest hands than to live off fortunes built on others' labor." The room fell silent. The laughter died. Calloway's smirk twisted, but he said nothing more. Evelyn lowered her gaze, ready for Adrian's rebuke. Instead, his voice cut through the silence, cool and decisive. "Dinner's over." Chairs scraped as the guests rose, grumbling quietly. Evelyn sat frozen, shocked. Adrian rarely showed cracks in front of his associates, but tonight, he had ended the evening for her sake. When they were alone, she whispered, "Why did you do that?" His eyes fixed on hers, intense and unreadable. "Because I don't allow anyone to insult what's mine." The words stung and warmed her all at once. What's mine? Was she only property to him, or was there something more hiding in the way his voice had hardened? That night, Evelyn lay awake, the child stirring gently inside her. She pressed a hand against her stomach, her thoughts tangled. She had sworn to herself that this was only a contract, that she wouldn't let her heart betray her. But Adrian was no longer just the cold man who had bought her womb. He was something else now, something dangerous. And though she couldn't name it yet, she knew her life would never be the same again. The night after Adrian dismissed his dinner guests early, the mansion seemed different. Evelyn walked its endless corridors with the feeling that invisible walls were shifting around her. For the first time since stepping into this world, she wasn't just the girl with the contract. She was something more, though she wasn't sure what. Adrian remained distant, but the distance was no longer cold indifference. It was restless, unsettled, as if he was wrestling with something he couldn't control. Evelyn sensed it every time their eyes met, and every time he turned away too quickly. One morning, as Evelyn prepared to leave for another prenatal appointment, she fainted. The maid screamed, and within minutes, Adrian was at her side, scooping her into his arms without hesitation. His face, usually carved from stone, was tight with panic. "Call the doctor now," he barked. At the hospital, machines beeped steadily as Evelyn lay pale on the bed. Adrian stood nearby, pacing like a caged lion, demanding answers. "She's underweight, exhausted," the doctor explained gently. "Stress isn't helping. She must rest more. The pregnancy is delicate." Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. For a man who had mastered every market, every negotiation, this helplessness was unbearable. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was his face hovering above hers. "You scared me," he said quietly, the sharpness gone from his voice. She blinked at him in confusion. "You? Scared?" "Yes." His jaw flexed, as though admitting it cost him something. "Don't do that again." A weak laugh escaped her lips. "I didn't exactly plan it." He exhaled sharply, and for a brief moment, his hand brushed hers. It wasn't calculated or cold. It was instinct, human and raw. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she said nothing. When they returned to the mansion, Adrian gave orders that shocked the staff. "From now on, she is not to be disturbed. Whatever she asks for, she gets." The whispers began again, but this time with fear. No one wanted to cross the master of the house when his voice carried that edge. In the days that followed, Adrian changed in small but unmistakable ways. He began joining Evelyn on short walks in the garden, claiming it was to keep an eye on her, though his pace always slowed to match hers. He sat with her in the library, sometimes in silence, sometimes asking questions about her childhood. And once, when she mentioned her mother's favorite candy recipe, his eyes softened in a way she had never seen. But just as the fragile bond between them began to grow, new cracks appeared. One afternoon, Evelyn overheard voices in the grand hall. Adrian's mother had returned, her tone sharp as glass. "This girl is ruining you," Elizabeth hissed. "She doesn't belong here. The press already mocks you. End this nonsense before it destroys our name." She's carrying my child," Adrian replied evenly. "Then take the child and send her away. That's what the contract is for." Evelyn froze at the top of the staircase, her heart pounding. She gripped the railing, fighting the wave of nausea that rose in her chest. "And if I don't?" Adrian asked. "Then you're a fool," his mother spat. "She's using you. You'll see it soon enough." Evelyn slipped back to her room before she could hear more. She sat on the edge of her bed, trembling. The contract. The reminder cut deeper than any insult. No matter how gentle Adrian had become, no matter how much her heart wanted to believe he was changing, the truth remained. She was here because of money. That evening, Adrian came to check on her. He noticed her pale face, her distant eyes. "You didn't eat," he said softly. "I wasn't hungry." He stepped closer. "You need to keep your strength." Her gaze lifted, sharp with pain. "Why do you care? Once this child is born, you'll have what you want. Isn't that all this ever was?" The silence between them was heavy. Adrian's lips parted as though to answer, but no words came. For the first time, Evelyn saw hesitation in him, uncertainty cracking through his armor. She turned away before he could see the tears glistening in her eyes. Adrian left the room without another word, but that night he couldn't sleep. He sat in his study long after midnight, staring at the city skyline, haunted by her question. "Why do you care?" He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that for the first time in his life, control was slipping from his hands, not over his empire, but over his own heart. The weeks after Evelyn fainted passed with uneasy calm, but underneath, storm clouds gathered. She followed the doctor's orders, eating more, resting longer, but her eyes grew darker with worry. She carried a secret, one she couldn't share with Adrian, one that threatened everything. Late at night, when the mansion was silent, she would slip into the small guest room she had turned into her private corner. There, she hid medical reports she hadn't shown him, reports that warned of complications. Her heart condition, once stable, was weakening under the strain of pregnancy. The risks weren't just possible, they were real. She told herself she couldn't let Adrian know. He had made it clear from the beginning. This was a contract. If he discovered she might not survive childbirth, he might end the deal, take the child by force, and erase her from his world entirely. So she carried the burden alone. But Adrian was too observant to be fooled for long. One evening, he came home earlier than expected and found Evelyn sitting in the library, a hand pressed against her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. The papers she had hidden slipped from her lap when she jumped to her feet. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Nothing," she said quickly, fumbling to gather them. He stepped forward, his voice cold but sharp. "Don't lie to me." Her grip tightened around the papers. "It doesn't matter. You wouldn't understand." Adrian snatched them before she could stop him. His eyes scanned the words, the medical terms outlining risk after risk. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, his composure broke. "You knew," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You knew this pregnancy could kill you, and you didn't tell me?" Evelyn's lips trembled. "If I had, would you have let me stay? Or would you have thrown me out and taken the child for yourself?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "I couldn't risk it. I need this child to live. I need to give my family something I never had hope. If I have to risk my life to do that, then so be it." For a man who always had control, Adrian felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had built empires, destroyed rivals, and faced boardrooms without flinching. But now, standing before this fragile woman who had sold candy to survive, he felt powerless. "You're reckless," he said, but his voice cracked. "You don't get to decide this alone." Evelyn lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tears. "I already did." "Oh." The argument left a wound between them. For days, Adrian avoided her, throwing himself into work, appearing colder than ever. But at night, he couldn't escape her words. He saw her face in his mind, pale and determined, carrying a strength that defied logic. Meanwhile, Evelyn grew lonelier. The mansion felt heavier, its walls taller. She longed for the simple days of selling candy on the street, even with all their hardship, because at least then she hadn't felt like she was disappearing piece by piece. But fate didn't allow her much time to wallow. At another doctor's appointment, the press swarmed. Reporters shouted, cameras flashing like lightning. One tabloid photographer shoved too close, nearly knocking her down. Adrian caught her arm, pulling her protectively against him. For the first time, his glare wasn't just cold, it was murderous. "Back away," he barked, his voice like steel. The crowd fell silent under his fury. That evening, headlines blared. Blackwell's candy girl under threat. Adrian protects mystery mother of his child. Inside the mansion, Elizabeth Blackwell exploded. "Do you see what she's doing to you?" she raged at Adrian. "The world laughs at us because of her. End this before it destroys the family name." But Adrian didn't answer. He stood by the window, staring into the city lights. Her words from the other night echoing in his mind. "I need this child to live." He couldn't admit it aloud, not even to himself. But something had changed. Her secret, her defiance, her willingness to sacrifice it, was unraveling him. And as Evelyn sat alone in her room, whispering lullabies to the child inside her, Adrian found himself asking a question he had never asked before. What mattered more, his empire, or the fragile, stubborn woman carrying his heir? The weeks after Evelyn fainted passed with uneasy calm, but underneath, storm clouds gathered. She followed the doctor's orders, eating more, resting longer, but her eyes grew darker with worry. She carried a secret, one she couldn't share with Adrian, one that threatened everything. Late at night, when the mansion was silent, she would slip into the small guest room she had turned into her private corner. There, she hid medical reports she hadn't shown him, reports that warned of complications. Her heart condition, once stable, was weakening under the strain of pregnancy. The risks weren't just possible, they were real. She told herself she couldn't let Adrian know. He had made it clear from the beginning. This was a contract. If he discovered she might not survive childbirth, he might end the deal, take the child by force, and erase her from his world entirely. So she carried the burden alone. But Adrian was too observant to be fooled for long. One evening, he came home earlier than expected and found Evelyn sitting in the library, a hand pressed against her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. The papers she had hidden slipped from her lap when she jumped to her feet. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Nothing," she said quickly, fumbling to gather them. He stepped forward, his voice cold but sharp. "Don't lie to me." Her grip tightened around the papers. "It doesn't matter. You wouldn't understand." Adrian snatched them before she could stop him. His eyes scanned the words, the medical terms outlining risk after risk. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, his composure broke. "You knew," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You knew this pregnancy could kill you, and you didn't tell me?" Evelyn's lips trembled. "If I had, would you have let me stay? Or would you have thrown me out and taken the child for yourself?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. "I couldn't risk it. I need this child to live. I need to give my family something I never had hope. If I have to risk my life to do that, then so be it." For a man who always had control, Adrian felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had built empires, destroyed rivals, and faced boardrooms without flinching. But now, standing before this fragile woman who had sold candy to survive, he felt powerless. "You're reckless," he said, but his voice cracked. "You don't get to decide this alone." Evelyn lifted her chin, her voice steady despite the tears. "I already did." "Oh." The argument left a wound between them. For days, Adrian avoided her, throwing himself into work, appearing colder than ever. But at night, he couldn't escape her words. He saw her face in his mind, pale and determined, carrying a strength that defied logic. Meanwhile, Evelyn grew lonelier. The mansion felt heavier, its walls taller. She longed for the simple days of selling candy on the street, even with all their hardship, because at least then she hadn't felt like she was disappearing piece by piece. But fate didn't allow her much time to wallow. At another doctor's appointment, the press swarmed. Reporters shouted, cameras flashing like lightning. One tabloid photographer shoved too close, nearly knocking her down. Adrian caught her arm, pulling her protectively against him. For the first time, his glare wasn't just cold, it was murderous. "Back away," he barked, his voice like steel. The crowd fell silent under his fury. That evening, headlines blared, "Blackwell's Candy Girl under threat. Adrian protects mystery mother of his child." Inside the mansion, Elizabeth Blackwell exploded. "Do you see what she's doing to you?" she raged at Adrian. "The world laughs at us because of her. End this before it destroys the family name." But Adrian didn't answer. He stood by the window, staring into the city lights, her words from the other night echoing in his mind. "I need this child to live." He couldn't admit it aloud, not even to himself. But something had changed. Her secret, her defiance, her willingness to sacrifice it was unraveling him, and as Evelyn sat alone in her room, whispering lullabies to the child inside her, Adrian found himself asking a question he had never asked before. What mattered more, his empire, or the fragile, stubborn woman carrying his heir? "You said, viết phần 10 bám sát tài liệu content mẫu 4. TXT. 900 token. Không viết trên canvas. Tiếp nối phần 9. Nhớ đồng nhất nhân vật và bối cảnh. Tuyến thời gian sao cho phù hợp. Sihu y văn phong kỹ thuật viết trả lại kết quả để làm nội dung YouTube, chứ không phải biên tập như đạo diễn." GPT Millionaire Stories said. The storm inside the Blackwell family broke wide open after the press incident. Evelyn could feel it in the air. Every servant moved more stiffly. Every conversation stopped when she entered a room. She had become the scandal no one could silence. Elizabeth Blackwell struck next. One morning, a lawyer appeared at Evelyn's door. Briefcase in hand, his tone clipped and professional. He placed a thick folder on the table. "This is a supplemental agreement," he explained coldly. "Upon the birth of the child, you will relinquish all rights. Financial compensation will be provided. Once you sign, there will be no further claims." Evelyn's chest tightened as she skimmed the pages. Legal language carved her out of the future entirely. She would not be the child's guardian. She would not be part of its life. She was merely a vessel, erased once her purpose was fulfilled. Adrian walked in mid-conversation, his expression hardening as he saw the documents. "What is this?" Elizabeth's voice carried from behind the lawyer. She had followed him in. "Protection. For our family. For you. Do you think the world will accept a candy seller as the mother of a Blackwell heir? Sign it and end this charade." Evelyn's hand shook as she held the pen. She thought of her mother's frail health, her brother's tired face, the endless debts. Signing would at least guarantee their security. But in her chest, something screamed that she was surrendering more than herself. She was surrendering her child. Adrian's eyes flicked to her, then to the paper. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, coldly, he turned to his mother. "Leave us." Elizabeth bristled, but his tone left no room for argument. The lawyer followed her out, the door shutting softly behind them. Evelyn stood frozen, pen still in her hand. Adrian approached slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "Were you going to sign it?" Her throat tightened. "What choice do I have? You said it yourself. This is a contract. I was never meant to be anything more." Something flickered in his eyes, pain, anger, maybe both. "That doesn't mean you erase yourself from your child's life." Her voice broke. "It's not about me. It's about survival. If I fight, your family will crush me. At least this way, my family is safe." The words shattered something in Adrian. He had built his entire empire on the belief that money could buy control. Yet here stood Evelyn, ready to sell her very identity for the sake of others. Not out of greed, but sacrifice. He reached out, almost touching her hand, then stopped. His voice dropped low. "You think I would let them take my child's mother away? You think I would let you disappear?" Evelyn's eyes widened. For the first time, she saw the steel in him bend, not for power, not for wealth, but for her. But before she could respond, the door opened again. Elizabeth returned, her tone icy. "Adrian, don't be foolish. She'll ruin you. This girl is nothing but a burden. When the child is born, she is finished." Evelyn flinched, but Adrian's jaw clenched. He stepped in front of her, his body shielding hers. "Enough. Say another word against her, and you'll answer to me." Elizabeth's eyes blazed, but she saw something in her son's face that stopped her cold. Without another word, she swept out, her heels striking the floor like daggers. Silence filled the room again. Evelyn lowered the pen, tears welling in her eyes. "Why did you—" Adrian cut her off. "Because you're not disposable. Not to me." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The walls of the mansion, the weight of the contract, the claws of his family, all of it faded beneath the raw intensity of his words. Later that night, Evelyn sat by the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. She pressed her hand gently against her stomach, whispering to the child she carried. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something had shifted. Adrian Blackwell, the man who had bought her womb with cold precision, had just stood against his own family for her. And though she tried to fight it, her heart whispered the truth she feared most. She was no longer just enduring this contract. She was beginning to hope. The night after the confrontation with his mother, Adrian sensed Evelyn slipping further away from him. She moved through the mansion like a shadow, quiet and guarded, her strength hiding something deeper. He watched her, knowing she was concealing a truth he couldn't reach. One afternoon, he found her in the guest room, hurriedly tucking papers into a box. When she noticed him, her face paled. Adrian's gaze sharpened. "What are you hiding from me?" "It's nothing," she said too quickly. He stepped closer, voice low. "Don't lie. I see it every time you look away. You're carrying more than just this child, you're carrying fear." Her throat tightened. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything, about the doctor's warnings, about the risk to her life. But if she did, she feared he would force her to sign his family's documents, take the baby, and cut her out forever. So she straightened her shoulders and whispered, "I'm fine." Adrian's jaw clenched, his frustration raw. "You drive me insane, Evelyn." He left, but his anger wasn't born of coldness, it was fear he couldn't admit. That night, Evelyn lay awake, pain rippling through her body. She gripped the sheets, whispering to the life inside her, "Hold on, please hold on." By the time the pain faded, she was drenched in sweat and tears. When Adrian returned late, he found her pale, trembling on the bed, his composure shattered. "What happened?" "Just a scare," she whispered. He sank beside her, gripping her hand. "Don't shut me out. I can't lose you." Her eyes filled with tears. "And I can't lose this baby. If I have to risk everything, I will." For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwell realized he was powerless. And that fear, sharper than any business war he had ever fought, threatened to break him. The following morning, whispers of Evelyn's fainting spell reached the press before the household could contain it. Tabloids ran wild with cruel headlines. Blackwell's candy girl risks it all. Billionaire buys an heir. Mother may not survive. La. At breakfast, Adrian sat stiff, phone buzzing endlessly with calls from board members and shareholders. Across the table, Evelyn pushed her food around without eating, her face pale but defiant. Elizabeth Blackwell stormed into the room, brandishing a newspaper. "Do you see? This is the disaster I warned you about. She's endangering everything, your legacy, your company, your name." Evelyn's chest tightened, but before she could speak, Adrian's voice cut like ice. "Enough!" His mother glared at him. "If you don't end this, she'll destroy you. She'll die, and you'll be left with the mess." Evelyn stood, trembling but strong. "If I'm such a burden, then maybe I should leave right now." The words hung heavy in the air. Adrian rose sharply, his chair scraping the floor. His eyes burned with a mix of fury and desperation. "You're not going anywhere." Evelyn froze, shocked by the intensity in his voice. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said no more. That night, in the quiet of her room, Evelyn whispered to her unborn child, "We're not wanted here, but we'll survive. I promise you that." Meanwhile, in his study, Adrian gripped a glass of untouched scotch, staring out at the city. He had spent his life believing power meant control, but as the weight of Evelyn's secret pressed on him, he realized control was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if he wanted it back. Adrian's sleepless nights grew longer, but answers came when he least expected them. One afternoon, on his way back from a meeting, he passed the hospital wing where Evelyn often went. Through the slightly open door, he heard her voice soft, trembling yet steady. "If anything happens to me," she told the doctor, "save my baby first. Promise me that." Adrian froze. The world tilted under his feet. He pushed the door open, but Evelyn gasped when she saw him, her face drained of color. "You knew," he whispered, voice rough. "You've been hiding this from me." Tears welled in her eyes. "Because I knew what you'd do. You'd take the baby and push me out. I couldn't let you decide for me." Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. For the first time in years, he felt helpless, stripped of every shield. "Do you think I would ever let you die for this? Do you think I only wanted an heir?" His voice broke, raw and human. Evelyn shook her head. "This child is everything to me. I'd give my life if I had to." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with pain and truth. Adrian stepped closer, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't bury anymore. "And what if I told you you are everything to me?" Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, the walls between them cracked completely, and both stood exposed, bound not by contract but by something deeper neither had dared to name. The truth could no longer stay hidden. Within days, rumors spread beyond the tabloids, whispers in boardrooms, speculation among shareholders, headlines questioning whether Adrian Blackwell had risked his empire for a street girl who might not even survive childbirth. Instead of retreating, Adrian did something no one expected. He called a press conference. Cameras flashed as he stood tall at the podium, Evelyn beside him, her hands trembling but her chin lifted high. "I will not tolerate the lies any longer," Adrian's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Evelyn Carter is not a scandal, nor a mistake. She is the mother of my child, and she is my choice. My family, my company, my name, none of it means anything if I don't have the courage to stand beside her." The room erupted, journalists shouting questions, but Adrian raised a hand, silencing them. He turned slightly toward Evelyn, his voice softening just enough to shake her heart. "She has risked everything for this child, and I will risk everything to protect her." For a moment, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She had endured humiliation, judgment, whispers behind her back. Now, in front of the world, Adrian had shattered the contract that bound them and replaced it with something stronger: recognition, respect, and a promise. That night, the news cycle exploded. Blackwell declares loyalty to candy seller. Billionaire risks empire for love. Oh? And for the first time since their story began, Evelyn no longer felt like a shadow in Adrian's world. She felt seen. The weeks that followed were the hardest Evelyn had ever known. Her body weakened as the due date drew near. Every step, a battle between fear and hope. Adrian never left her side. The man who once treated her as a transaction now sat by her bed at night, holding her hand through every wave of pain, whispering words she never imagined he could say. When the time came, the delivery room blurred into chaos, doctors rushing, machines beeping, Evelyn's cries breaking through the sterile walls. Adrian gripped her hand, his own heart pounding as if it might burst. He had faced hostile takeovers and billion-dollar deals, but nothing terrified him more than the thought of losing her. Hours later, a newborn's cry filled the room. Evelyn's chest heaved with relief as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms. The baby's small fingers curled instinctively around hers, fragile yet fierce. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She had kept her promise. Adrian leaned close, his voice breaking. "You gave me more than an heir. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." Evelyn turned her tired eyes toward him. "And you gave me a reason to hope again." Days later, the three of them stood on the balcony of the Blackwell mansion. The city stretched before them, bathed in the glow of sunrise. Adrian slipped an arm around Evelyn's waist, the baby cradled safely between them. "There's no contract anymore," he whispered. "Only us. Only family." Evelyn rested her head against his shoulder, her heart full. For the first time, she wasn't the candy seller fighting to survive. And he wasn't the billionaire bound by duty. They were simply two souls who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. And as the morning light washed over them, their story closed not with wealth or power, but with love, resilience, and a new beginning.